Welcome into another edition of the Charm City Birdwatch podcast. I'm your host, Jake McDonald. For all things Charm City Birdwatch Baltimore sports coverage, you can follow us on Twitter at CharmCityBW, Facebook.com/CharmCityBirdwatch, and of course, CharmCityBirdwatch.com. And you are listening to this podcast through either iTunes or SoundCloud. I'm your host, Jake McDonald. You can follow me on Twitter at JMcDonald95. And again, before we get started, I wanted to mention, as I did the other day in Tuesday's podcast, that we are looking to expand our site and get as many people covering Baltimore sports as we can. So if you're interested in covering the Ravens and Orioles, Terps, Towson, any other Baltimore sports coverage as either a hobby or something you want to put on your resume, you can contact us at charmcitybirdwatch@gmail.com. Shoot us an email with any writing experience you have, as well as a resume with any writing samples you may have. We are looking for people not only to write, but be involved in the podcast as well, and with our social media expansion and helping out that platform as well. So any inquiries, charmcitybirdwatch@gmail.com. And we're going to get started today by bringing in Luke Jones, Orioles and Ravens beat writer of WNST.net, who has been covering the Orioles at Camden Yards as they go through their current 4-game losing streak, most recently being swept by the Minnesota Twins, getting ready to hit the road for a 3-game road trip against the Houston Astros, who have the best record in baseball. So being in this 4-game losing streak with the struggles of the entire pitching staff and, of course, the offense as well, certainly doesn't bode well for them as they hit the road before coming home to face the Red Sox and Yankees. And, of course, Luke will also be out at Owings Mills as the Ravens participate in their organized team activities today. Luke Jones of WNST.net. You can follow him on Twitter at Baltimore Luke, and you can email him at luke@WNST.net, and also check out all of his Orioles and Ravens coverage at WNST.net. Want to welcome in Luke Jones once again into the Charm City Birdwatch podcast. So, Luke, 4-game losing streak for the Orioles now, very uncharacteristic of them at Camden Yards, where they've been so dominant. They entered the with a 15-4 record going into the homestand. So really, it's been kind of we were expecting the Twins to bring good competition, but they're really entering one of the toughest parts of their schedule the rest of the way with this Houston trip, and then coming home to face the Red Sox and Yankees. Really, just the entire pitching staff right now is a big concern for this team. The bullpen that's been such a staple for them over the past few years has been better the past 2 games, but once again blew up in the first game of the series with the Twins. But now with Tillman struggling, what's going on with Jimenez possibly not being in much longer, and Gausman. This pitching staff really is a problem for this team right now.
It is, and some of those problems you anticipated. Obviously, Ubaldo Jimenez, we've seen this for the better part of going on 4 years now. We'll see if he finishes out the season, but we know there's also quite a bit of money he's still owed for the rest of this season, and that's kind of been the motivating factor for keeping him around as long as they have. But you go down the list. Chris Tillman, going back to last year with the shoulder, there was quite a bit of unknown there. I think I give him a little more slack as far as some optimism that he can get better. Clearly, he's not physically at the level he was prior to the shoulder in terms of velocity. He's kind of averaging 90 miles per hour as opposed to being a guy who kind of sit around 92 and be able to reach for a little extra when he needs it. Kevin Gausman, to me, that's the big shock as far as how poorly he's pitched so far this season. Even if you weren't a believer in him necessarily taking a step to become a true ace, even though he pitched that way over the final 2 months last season, he hasn't even been the guy who's been reliable middle-of-the-rotation starter over the last 3 years. It's not as though this guy hadn't had success. So, you have all those concerns in the starting rotation. Wade Miley's ERA looks good, but everything else about his performance, not so good when you look at some of the peripherals and the inability to get deep in the games consistently. But the bullpen, you tell me Zach Britton's going to get hurt in mid-April and miss the better part of going on 6 weeks now. Yeah, I'm gonna tell you that the bullpen is going to suffer for that. And kind of the lost thing that I've talked a little bit about, Jake, is you look at this offense overall, and look, there have been some stretches where they've been fine. They've had some short spurts where they've really hit the ball. But overall, over the course of the close to 2 months now into this season, the offense has been pretty mediocre, pretty average. I think they're slightly above average in runs scored per game compared to the league average. Home runs, they haven't hit as at the prolific level that they did last year. And when you consider the pitching concerns that they've had, I think you have to look at this offense and say you need a little bit more. I mean, even the final two games of the Minnesota series, Dylan Bundy pitched exceptionally well. Two runs given up over 7 innings, and Tillman wasn't good on Wednesday. Don't misconstrue, but at the same time, his performance wasn't disastrous. I mean, they still gave up 4 runs over the course of the game. Yeah. Most of the time, you give up 4 runs, you're hoping with this offense you should have a pretty good chance to win more often than not. So there have been a lot of stretches like that, and the thing that I think that's been lost on a lot of people in terms of the bullpen, besides Zach Britton being hurt, go back and look at April, go back and look at the first week and a half, 2 weeks of May. This ball club's won a ton of close, low-scoring games, and because of that, their bullpen, their top bullpen arms had to work really hard and had to work consistently. And there I go again, mentioning the offense. If the offense had been a little bit better earlier in the season, maybe you would have had a few more comfortable leads. Maybe you could have avoided using Brad Brock and Darren O'Day and Michael Givens quite as often as they were, and they wouldn't be in the position they're in now. Now, all that being said, I get it. They've lost 10 out of 13. They've been really bad over the last 2 weeks, but they were 22-10 before that. So part of this is the ebbs and flows of the season where you're going to have some stretches where you look like you're not going to win another game, and you're going to have some stretches where you look like you're the best team in baseball. Now, we've seen both of those types of stretches from the Orioles so far this year, so the truth lies somewhere in the middle. You hope it's closer to being 22-10, but very clearly the pitching needs to stabilize. They can't continue to go down the road where Dylan Bundy's their only reliable starter and the bullpen is not just without Zach Britton, but not getting quite the consistency from some of those other names that we mentioned. So I'm not pushing the panic button just yet, but the pitching is clearly something that we thought could be a concern, specifically with the rotation. And if you're not going to have Zach Britton, then by all accounts he's not going to be back until at least the second half of next month. Then yeah, I would have fully told you that the bullpen was going to struggle.
What's your opinion on Chris Davis, in the second year of this huge contract, this 7-year contract he got? He's 31 years old, and we know great, first baseman. We all know what he can do on the defensive side of the ball. But, last season hit .221. This year he's only at .239 with 10 home runs and 18 RBI. And he leads the league in strikeouts, which we know he's a strikeout guy. But really, I don't know how they can afford to keep him, obviously for the next few years, but he's going to be, 36, 37, 38 at the end of this contract. I don't think there's any way they're going to keep him for as long as the contract plays out.
I think they will, because they're not going to dump that salary. I mean, it's unless there's a case where 3-4 years from now it's so bad and maybe they want to swap bad contracts for someone else. I mean, to me, Ubaldo Jimenez is the perfect example of why Chris Davis is going to be here for that long. So, I think with Davis, you mentioned it. The strikeouts have always been there. I'm not someone who's been nearly as worked up about strikeouts. I understand the stigma, but as we get into this, we're in this sabermetric age, and we understand strikeouts are at an all-time high around Major League Baseball. I mean, every single year, seemingly, we're setting a new Major League record for strikeouts across the league. But the thing with Chris Davis that's been more concerning for me is not the strikeouts, but it's the amount of strikeouts looking over the last couple of years. This was a trend that started really about halfway through last year. And over the offseason, I touched on this. I thought perhaps it was because he was playing with that dislocated thumb that he suffered early last season, and maybe he was just saving his bullet, so to speak, not trying to exert himself quite as much and kind of saving for those times where he's going to try to attack the baseball. But it's only gotten worse this year. He is I think he's already been called out looking on strikes somewhere around the neighborhood of 30, 31 times already. And that is by far leading Major League Baseball. And I think I saw on Baseball Reference, for the typical league average hitter who has 600 plate appearances, they typically only have 30 strikeouts looking for the whole season. So that to me is just, it's bizarre, it's startling, and as much as he's going to strike out, and he strikes out swinging plenty as well. You can't do any. They always talk about that contact to damage ratio with Chris Davis. He's going to strike out a lot, but he's going to hit home runs. He's going to produce with the bat. The numbers will be there at the end of the season for the most part. And if you're not swinging the bat, how's that going to be the case? So with Chris Davis, this is what you're going to get when you sign a power hitter to a 7-year, $161 million contract. I mean, they're not getting out of that deal. Unless you're talking maybe the final year or two at most. So I mean, it's really a case of you just have to kind of stem the tide a little bit. As you pointed out, he's very good defensively. He is one of the few hitters in this lineup who draws a walk. And you take the good and the bad with Chris Davis, and when he's going good, he's the kind of guy who can carry your club. When he's going bad, he can be maddening to watch, and certainly seeing him over this last homestand, home run on Wednesday notwithstanding, seeing him take so many strikeouts looking, that to me has been the most frustrating part about watching him.
Moving on to Manny Machado real quick. We're going to get to his slow start this season in a minute, but for those who don't really follow the dollars of baseball and how the business side works, what impact is the Davis contract going to have on the Orioles trying to re-sign Machado next year?
Well, I mean, it's you're clearly talking about someone who's making $20+ million a year. Now, keep in mind, a good portion of that money is deferred. So, I think, does it impact it? Yes. But Manny Machado is such a unique case, and despite the fact that he is off to a poor start this year, he's still going to be a guy who's going to be getting in the neighborhood of, at least $300 million, I would think. I mean, some people have speculated he could get as much as $400 million. He's not as good as Mike Trout. I put him below Bryce Harper, but he's not too terribly far away from players like that when you consider his defensive value as well. So, I mean, the Davis contract certainly impacted. I mean, any player who's making a real financial or making a real money, and you're having to make a real financial commitment to, is going to have an impact. I mean, just about anyone on this club that's making north of making at least 8 figures is going to be someone that impacts that. But I'm very skeptical at this point until we see the Orioles make that kind of a commitment to a player. And to their credit, they've made commitments. I mean, no one thought they'd re-sign Chris Davis, so maybe they will re-sign Manny Machado. But you're talking about making at least twice the amount of the total amount of money committed to Manny Machado compared to what you're given with Chris Davis. And the reality is there are a lot of people out there, and no one, including people who have no ties to the Orioles, who say that those kind of contracts are bad investments, period. I mean, they say you shouldn't give $100+ million deals to just about anyone, and you should be someone who, you should be an organization that's developing players, and once they get to a point where they're getting ready to be paid, you should be selling off some of those players. So, we'll see how it plays out. If you ask me today, Jake, if I think the Orioles are going to re-sign Manny Machado, I'm going to say no. But at the same time, I would have said the same thing about Chris Davis. I would have said the same thing about Mark Trumbo. I probably would have said the same thing about Adam Jones even 5 years ago, and we see how that's turned out. So, you never say never, but as far as the Davis contract, yeah, I think it has an impact, but you're talking about a financial commitment that's going to have to be made to Manny Machado that blows any of these other contracts out of the water by a wide margin.
Of course, Machado's off to a slow start, only hitting .218 so far this season, which has been very uncharacteristic of him compared to previous years. I've heard a lot of people talk about this, including you and Nestor over at WNST.net. Of course, you can follow all Luke's work and his call-ins with Nestor on there. And you guys were talking the other night after Machado didn't even make an attempt to run to first base after the swinging strike with the ball in the dirt. Is that an ongoing issue? Is there talk in the locker room of Machado's attitude? Does he seem like the type of guy that has these bluffs every once in a while?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a major issue. I mean, we've seen Manny Machado have some gaps on the bases before. We've seen him not run out balls to first base before. And look, that's not to excuse it, but I mean, short of sitting the guy down and benching him and then creating perhaps a contentious relationship, I'm not sure what you do about that other than just, it's been addressed. Buck Showalter's talked about it in the past, that he's addressed it with Manny. I think this right now what we're seeing is a little bit unique compared to what we've seen in the past, where there have been examples of him not running out of ball, things of that nature. I think the slump is getting to him. I think you saw it with his body language over the course of this last homestand. I think you're seeing someone who's frustrated, and he's letting that seep into other aspects of his game. Even, Tuesday night in the fifth inning when Dylan Bundy got into some hot water, there was a foul ball that wasn't the easiest play in the world by any stretch, but it was an over-the-shoulder catch that Manny Machado needs to make in that spot. When your pitcher's in a jam, you have a chance to get an out. You have to get it, and he wasn't able to get it for whatever reason. Didn't really, alligator armed it, whatever you want to call it. Didn't look like he put his best foot forward on that one. But in terms of his performance this year, I think he's going to be fine. You look at his exit velocity, it's up there among the top hitters in baseball. His batting average on balls in play going into the off day was 222. His career mark is around 304. The major league, league average is right around 300 there. What does that tell you? That tells you he's hit into a lot of bad luck over the course of the season. But we have seen him be a little more pull happy. I think we saw this starting with the second half of last year, get a little more, seems like he's a little more inclined to try to hit a home run, which Manny Machado at his best is when he's hitting line drives all over the field and is still going to hit a lot of home runs in the process. So I think you're seeing this slump affect him mentally, and that's not to excuse him, but I think that's what we're seeing. And I'm not the type that questions the player's effort or focus too often. I think that's something that is overblown most of the time. I think far too often we question the player's effort when they're not getting the job done, when in reality it's a really tough job to do, what these guys do on a regular basis. But I think you're seeing those struggles affecting him, and I think it has impacted his focus and effort some, and I think he'll be fine. I still think that if we're talking a month from now, Jake, and he's still hitting 220, I'll be very, very surprised. But to this point, he still hasn't gotten going the way the Orioles need him to get going, and that's for sure.
Moving on to the Ravens now, they have another session of organized team activities today at the Under Armour Performance Center at Owings Mills. A lot of, I've been doing a lot of writing for the Ravens, not only for, Charm City Birdwatch, but for a fan-sided Ravens website as well. And I feel like a lot of the stuff I've written is kind of like beating a dead horse. We know the defense is going to be sound. There's a lot of depth there. Hopefully they can be one of the top units in the NFL. Certainly with all the pass rushing help they got this offseason, all the secondary help as well. I think the big question is just going to be who's going to be starting next to C.J. Mosley in the middle of the defense. But those questions I think will take care of themselves, but some questions that I think are going to take a lot more thinking about is going to be, number one, who's Joe Flacco going to be throwing the ball to, and number two, who's going to be protecting Joe Flacco coming off the year two of his knee surgery. And I would venture to say those are definitely the top two concerns of the Baltimore Ravens entering training camp soon.
I think you're absolutely right. I would flip those. I'd put the offensive line first and then wide receiver second, but I agree with you completely, Jake. I look at what they've done defensively, and look, I saw the same defense that everyone saw in the final 3 or 4 games that struggled, that gave up the fourth quarter lead against Pittsburgh. I understand that. I'm not saying I wouldn't have addressed the defense, but at the same time, what was the biggest issue with the defense in December last year? To me, it was they didn't have Jimmy Smith on the field, and that's still a major question mark for this team. If you're talking about wanting to be a special defense, it's still a question of, is Jimmy Smith going to be on the field and healthy? Because Brandon Carr's 30. Marlon Humphrey, as much as he's a first-round pick and has this talent and potential, he's still a rookie, and you wonder about that. So as much as I think on paper the defense has a chance to be special, I still need to see it be special. I think it'll be good. I think it can be really good, but it's tough to be great, especially in this day and age in the NFL. So that's why I look at this offense, and I've really been mystified. I've really been baffled with the lack of attention paid to an offense that was broken last year. And some people have pointed to, okay, they scored 27 points in the Pittsburgh game in Week 16. All right. If you're going to take a piece of anecdotal evidence to say that the offense is fine, that was a broken offense in 2016. They fired their offensive coordinator in October. They continually refused to commit to running the football. And they've lost two starting offensive linemen. One in Rick Wagner, who some people feel is a fringe Pro Bowl kind of a right tackle. And I know Jeremy Zuda wasn't a star, even though he did end up being in the Pro Bowl, which is another topic entirely. But he's still a starting player. And I look at the little that they've done. I mean, they signed Danny Woodhead, who I like as a player, but is also 32 and coming off of an ACL injury. And they've drafted Nico Siragusa in the 4th round and Jermaine Illuminor in the 5th round as offensive linemen who maybe Siragusa's ready to play, and maybe they kick Alex Lewis out to right tackle. But that's a major question. I don't think you should be counting on that. And Illuminor is more of a developmental guy. So we have this offense that wasn't very good last year. The Ravens have lost Rick Wagner. They've lost Jeremy Zuda. They've lost Steve Smith to retirement. They lost Kamar Aiken to free agency. And they've netted a 32-year-old running back coming off of an ACL injury and 2 day 3 offensive linemen. I mean, that doesn't add up to me. It just doesn't. So I look at this and I get it. I've asked Ozzie Newsome the question. Other media members have asked the question, and he said, we're not done yet. There's still players out there to be had. They could still make a trade. I understand all that, but when you have multiple concerns on the offensive side of the football, when you were pretty bad to begin with last year, I look at this and it doesn't add up to me. I see an offense that right now looks like a bottom 10 kind of offense in the NFL, and that might even be nice to say bottom 10. So there's a lot of work to be done there. I do think Joe Flacco can be better because he will be another year removed from the knee surgery, but haven't we learned our lesson here looking at the Ravens over the last 4 years since Super Bowl 47 that Joe Flacco needs to have at least good talent around him? And I like Mike Wallace. I think Brashad Perriman and Chris Moore have some potential, certainly, but these aren't established wide receivers. These aren't guys that you can automatically count on to be able to move the chains and run the entire route tree and catch the football consistently. Where's that intermediate receiver that's going to be Joe Flacco's go-to guy on 3rd and 7? I don't see that guy on this roster, and I think you're putting this roster is in a position where that defense doesn't just have to be really good. That defense has to be special, talking Denver, Seattle kind of good in order for this football team to get where it wants to go, because I'm not going to be a believer in this offense. Marty Mornhinweg, who was retained, all right, that's fine. You've lost some personnel. You haven't really gained a whole lot of personnel. I know they have Greg Roman. I know they have a new offensive line coach. I'm not saying those guys can't make their mark, but none of this, to me, looking at the offensive side of the ball, adds up to a unit that's going to be good enough to get the Ravens where they want to go, unless that defense truly is special in 2017.
WNST Ravens and Orioles beat writer Luke Jones joins us today on the Charm City Birdwatch podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Baltimore Luke and WNST.net as well. Luke, I think the Ravens definitely need to, like you alluded to, adding some pieces on the offensive line. We talked about Nick Mangold possibly being an option once they figure out what they have already in-house. I think, there's guys for free agents, I think, out there that, like Anquan Bolden, who's 36 years old, Victor Cruz, who's not the player he once was. To me, I would much rather, I could see a scenario where they make a trade. I think a perfect one that kind of screams, do it to me is with the Philadelphia Eagles, Jordan Matthews entering the final year of his contract. And really, they have so many, we talk about how loaded the defense is. They have so many pieces they could trade there. One that, fans might not think about that I kind of think of is Lardarius Webb possibly being trade bait, but with the situation where they already have Tony Jefferson and Eric Weddle locked in as their top 2 safeties on the roster. I think with the Eagles certainly would need some secondary help. They could get an established veteran back there on Lardarius Webb, and the Ravens get a receiver piece that could help them out on offense. What do you think about that possible scenario there?
The problem with that, though, Lardarius Webb was out there as a free agent for quite a while. Keep in mind the Ravens cut him for salary cap purposes and then re-signed him. What was that? But basically a month later, it might have been 3 weeks, something in that neighborhood. And he had a little bit of interest here and there, but not much. So I don't think Lardarius Webb has any trade value. I mean, beyond hypothetically, if some team's safety goes down in training camp, maybe you could get a 7th-round pick for him, something like that. I think the scenario you presented to me was something, and I've even heard from a couple different people here and there that The scenario was kicked around to actually trade Timmy Jernigan for Jordan Matthews. I've heard that from one or two people. I don't know how far that really got. And it ended up being, remember, the Ravens kind of just swapped third-round picks, to move up and traded Jernigan in the process. That's the kind of deal I think you would have had to have made, an expiring contract for another expiring contract. I think that's what you'd be looking at more so if you're going to do player for player. I think if you're going to acquire someone like Jordan Matthews, and I think he could make some sense for this team. I mean, I don't think he's a great receiver, but certainly more established in some of the options they have right now that they're going to be trying to count on. I think you'd have to trade a late draft pick for him, maybe a day 3 pick. I don't think you'd have to give up more than that to get Jordan Matthews at this point, considering he is in the final year of his contract. But I don't think Ladarius Webb is going to be the one to get it done because, if a team like the Eagles really liked him, they could have signed him as a free agent not that long ago and wouldn't have had to pay him very much money in order to do it.
Once again, WNST Ravens and Orioles beat writer Luke Jones joining us today on the Charm City Birdwatch podcast. Luke, I want to thank you again for joining me today, and best of luck going out there to the Under Armour Performance Center in Owings Mills today to get some, hopefully some questions answered, as much as we can get here at the end of May with Ravens OTAs going on, and we'll have to hope that the Orioles rebound this weekend against the Astros and see what their status is coming home to face two of their top rivals in the American League East.
There's certainly plenty going on. Thanks a lot for having me, Jake. I'll talk to you again soon.